FIFA's transfer rules have been declared illegal by Europe's highest court. That is the introduction on a huge story published today by Sun Sport's chief sports reporter Martin Lipton, which has the potential to totally transform football's global transfer system as we know it. Martin, what has happened?
Well, Will, let's start at the very beginning. This is all about a player who pretty much passed through English football without anybody noticing him, really. Lassana Diarra was at Chelsea and Arsenal and Portsmouth, then went bizarrely to Real Madrid. But it was when he went to Russia to play for Lokomotiv Moscow that this incident arose. Basically, he walked out on the club, they sacked him, they demanded he pay his transfer fee of 16 million back. He refused. He won partially at the Court of Arbitration for Sport, so halved the fine. But then he wanted to join Charleroi in Belgium, who weren't allowed to sign him unless they paid the fine. And Diarra basically sued FIFA, who backed Lokomotiv Moscow, on 3 grounds. One, that he was prevented from pursuing his trade, even though he'd broken his contract. 2, that the club that wanted to sign him couldn't without being penalised. And 3, that FIFA had backed Moscow by refusing to issue a transfer certificate allowing him to play for another club.
Right. And
after the case that began in a court in Belgium was transferred to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, that court has today ruled basically that FIFA's transfer rules are contrary to EU law on all 3 parts. In other words, FIFA's rules aren't valid anymore.
So just to clarify then, Martin, before we move on, Lokomotiv Moscow accused Diarra, and the reason they sort of got rid of him in the first place was they alleged that they accused him of not being fit enough, not turning up to training and basically not being ready to play. Is that right?
Yeah, he was in a pay dispute with them and then stopped training, and he claimed he was injured. They said he wasn't. He fell out with the coach and they decided to basically sack him.
Right. Okay.
But because they claimed that he had broken the terms of his contract by not turning up for training, they fined him the transfer fee of the 16 million, which when he joined from Anzi Makakakla the previous year.
OK, so Lassana Diarra employed the services of a lawyer. Most football fans will remember the huge landmark Bosman case, which was the last thing that sort of transformed the transfer system. Free transfers, obviously, off the back of that. He employed the same lawyer. And so what do we expect from now? What does that mean? Where do you expect this to go?
Well, yes, he did employ Jean-Louis Dupont, who was the lawyer for Jean-Marc Bosman in the 90s, and the Bosman case did transform European football. It prevented clubs from charging a fee for a player who was out of contract, and also went to the ending of the 3+2 rule, which you may remember meant that clubs were restricted to the number of foreign players they could play in European competitions, not domestically, but in European competitions. If this ruling is as it appears to be, and so far all we've seen is a summary judgment, a press release from the ECJ rather than the full ruling, it does appear that this will mean effectively the end of the transfer system. Right. If players can arbitrarily break their contracts and move to another club with, breaching their contract without there being a punishment, they will do so.
Right.
It's a significant landmark decision which will completely, if this is as it appears to be, rewrite the entire transfer rulebook. It will rewrite football rules.
Well, could this also see the end of transfer fees, Martin? Is that what you're suggesting?
I think so, yes, Will. I mean, if Dupont's argument straight away is this is a total victory and will lead inevitably to collective bargaining agreements purely between players and clubs, i.e. an American-style system where you can be offered a multi-year contract on huge wages, but someone else can come in and give you a better deal. And then the club has the option, they can possibly do trade, swap deals effectively, but without fees changing hands. And I think the significant aspect of this is a lot of the European markets in particular, look at Scandinavia and Belgium and Holland and France and the lower reaches of the Premier League and Scotland, not the Premier League, rather the EFL, the Pyramid. the business model of so many of these clubs is based on getting players, developing players, selling players to keep them solvent. If you can no longer sell players, this is a huge issue. And what you obviously will get is the wealthier clubs with deeper pockets can offer more and more and more to the biggest players, albeit they'll be restricted to the number of players they can hold in their squads. And the smaller clubs will be even less able to compete than they are now. And they won't even be able to make money. So if you're Bournemouth, for example, and Spurs come in for Dominic Solanke last summer, there's no money changing hands. It's just he goes to Spurs because they're offering him double money.
But would there be any, Martin, any exchange between the clubs? Like how would you foresee it working? I appreciate it's early in the system now, but you mentioned trades, but you also say about players can just break their contracts whenever. Surely there'd still have to be a transfer window, or surely clubs have to have some sort of leverage when you strike a contract with someone. They must have some ability to...
It's basically like any other employment. So you or I or any of the people watching this, you can move to another employer.
Yeah.
Now, they may have a contract that gives you a 3 months or 6 months or maybe even 12 months notice period, but no more than that. I think the transfer windows would still in place because that, if you'd had no transfer windows and go back to the old system, there would be a lack of stability within the system.
Yeah.
But what you would allow is that, for example, if PSG wanted Mo Salah, for example, they wouldn't have had to wait to the end of his contract to get him for nothing. They could persuade him, maybe with 12-month notice, because if that's the contract he has with Liverpool, shall we say, that he'll come next summer for nothing. But that doesn't have to be with 1 year to go in the contract. That could be at any point in the contract. So the players would be able to move within the registration periods, which are, as we know, normally 1st of July to 1st of September, and then for January. These would remain, I think. No one actually knows because we haven't got to that point yet. But players would have the right to serve notice of their imminent move.
So it just seems... effectively then they could still strike a deal and you're still going to see players striking deals with the biggest payers on the whole. I know it doesn't always happen, but on the whole that will be the case. So what does it mean for the clubs then? Be they, say, Premier League clubs, for example, what does it mean for them anymore? Just no more transfer fees whatsoever, and therefore, given not just the EFL clubs but Premier League clubs as well also rely on lots of their revenue as based on player sales, I assume PSR would still be a factor. So I'm trying to gauge whether it would be absolutely unrecognisable or still a little bit similar, but the money, rather than going between clubs, it just adds more onto the players' wages?
Well, I think the obvious trajectory would be that wages would go up and up and up. There's no question about that. If there's no fees to be paid, the agents and the players still want their share of the dough.
Yeah, the broadcast revenue would be the same, wouldn't it?
Theoretically, I think you'd have to completely rewrite the financial rules of both UEFA and the Premier League, because these rules are based on whichever system you use. We're moving to squad cost ratios, but that is a ratio of revenues on wages and transfers. If there are no transfers, it would just be wages. How do you then pay for the wages without increasing revenue? So it's a really grey area as what these new regulations might have to be. But I suspect that the regulations will have to change markedly. And it does mean it would be a thorough and utter revamp of everything we've known in football. And quite honestly, if anyone tells you they know what this would look like, they're lying, because no one even knows at the moment, apart from the judges in Luxembourg, what the actual ruling was. FIFA are claiming, it's nothing major, it's just a minor tweak. FIFA Pro, the International Players Union, is saying this will mean it's the landmark ruling which will completely change the landscape. They can't both be correct.
No, quite.
They can't both be correct because these are diametrically opposite views of the same ruling.
Yeah.
I suspect, looking at the press release, if that is borne out in any way by the full judgment, that reality is nearer to the FIFA position than the FIFA position. Dupont's position is, this is it. This is the end of transfers, effectively.
Yeah. Okay.
You might be right.
So, appreciating, Martin, that we're very early in this process at the moment. What do you expect to happen from now, and in what sort of timescales, based on the information you currently have?
Well, the first thing is that the ruling of the ECJ gets transferred back to the court in Mons in Belgium. And at some point in the next few months, because it won't be rushed through, that court will ratify the ECJ position, because it would be remiss of a small court in Belgium to go against the ruling of the biggest, most important judges in court in Europe.
In Europe, yeah.
After that, it will be, the onus will be on everybody to try and work out what the next steps are. But if it, as it appears, players can no longer be held to contracts, then you're going to see clubs looking to take advantage of that from next summer, I assume, if not even in January. Now, the one limitation on clubs getting players is the number of players you're allowed to register. You're only allowed 25 senior players.
Sure.
At the moment in England, 8 of them have got to be homegrown or club association trained. But even that could be about to change, because there's another case going on in Luxembourg at the moment, which would potentially see the rules on homegrown players also changing. But I think likely to only include players trained by a club rather than by an association. But basically, the limits on the number of players you can sign will be the only limits on who you sign, it would appear. And players will be looking to move. And the bigger clubs with the bigger budgets, the ones who can afford to spend £1 million a week maybe on salaries, it could even get to beyond that if there's no fees, they're going to be at a huge advantage. And the smaller clubs will be left to look for those players who aren't wanted by the bigger clubs. Is
that much different to now?
Well, the difference is that if you lose a player now, you're getting compensation for that player. Yeah. You know, when Spurs went to sign Solanke, that was 60 million to Bournemouth.
Yep.
There'd be no 60 million to Bournemouth. It would be see you later, alligator. Right. He would just go because he'd be allowed to do that. And Spurs would offer him probably 2 or 3 times the wages they offered him to go there this summer, because they wouldn't have to pay a fee for him. And it would be like that for all of the big clubs. So that would be the issue, is that the current system, which is based on basically a trickle down from the bigger clubs spending through the medium-sized clubs, who then spend on the players from the smaller clubs, and on and on and on. And particularly, as I say, in those European markets where it's all about player training, development and sales, the model doesn't work anymore. It doesn't exist anymore.
What would the incentive be then, Martin, for clubs to have academies? We've seen a couple of cases where they've sort of done away with them. Brentford's the one that springs to mind. But what would be the incentive to clubs to train young players anymore?
Well, I suppose it means they have players to play.
Yeah.
But would you spend an absolute fortune on an academy? You know, Chelsea's business model has been pretty much underpinned by selling academy products. And you know, we saw with Gallagher going this year, throughout the Abramovich years, they made money out of Cobham. Well, if there's no money to make, would you spend as much money on training those players? Yeah, the trouble is, of course, you still want to have players. You need to have the players coming through. So you'd want to have some, but would you really go with a massive international recruitment policy at getting 18-year-olds over? Probably not, because you can wait until they're 21 and ready to play and go and nick them for nothing. Yeah,
if someone's got to train them, though, I guess. Just one final one then, Martin, before we wrap up. What will clubs be thinking? You're in contact with a lot of senior people, a lot of clubs across Europe. What will the CEOs, and particularly the chief financial officers and the chief execs and the vice chairman, all that sort of thing, what would they be thinking at this stage?
I think a lot of them were thinking, how much is this going to cost us? Can we survive? Is this good for us? We don't know. We need clarity, because that's the one thing that we haven't got at this juncture, is absolute clarity of what happens next. But if Dupont and FIFA are correct, everything changes within a few months. It is absolutely one of the, if not the most significant rulings to affect sport there's ever been. And previously, the EU has had this thing, which was Article 165 of its constitution, which was the specificity of sport, i.e. sport isn't like normal industry, normal business.
Yeah.
Well, this ruling just throws that up in the air and says, no, footballers and other sportsmen playing for teams, whether that be basketball or cricket or whatever, are employees with exactly the same rights as any other employee in any other industry. You cannot put handcuffs on them. You can't charge to retain that, for people to take their services.